Good morning and welcome to today's episode of Trending. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Gareth. Today's show is brought to you by Red Life Therapy. For healing at a cellular level, head over to redlifedevices.com and use the code Ickonic for 10% off all Red Light devices. There is a free webinar explaining how all the technology works. That goes live on the 30th, and there's a link to it in the description below.
How you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm all right, mate. Right, what's your first story?
We're going to talk about flying because you're a big fan, aren't you?
Yep.
This is a subject that it doesn't get too much mainstream coverage. Flying is just something that happens. It's like driving. But when obviously a aviation disaster happens, it's very much mainstream news because aviation disasters usually result in an extreme loss of life because of the nature of flying. And what I want to talk about today is the last 12 months, the amount of incidents involving planes, whether that be fatal crashes, whether that be exposés from within companies like Boeing, talking about cutting corners, talking about basically safety concerns being raised to management and being ignored. Also, the cost of flying has gone up significantly. So I want to talk about, is this part of the agenda to get people to stop traveling? Now, you can do it one of two ways. We know the part of their agenda is to stop people and the freedom of movement within the population to jump on a plane, go and see places. With the 15-minute cities that we've obviously spoken about, they've not done that because they want you to still travel. They've done that because they want you in one place. Now, you can either do that through, the open upfront way, which is this is what we're doing, or you can start to plant that seed by increasing fear and anxiety around air travel and making it more and more difficult as well. Because I think, if you lined up 100 people and asked them what their top 2 or 3 fears are, I think a lot of them would say flying because, as we've discussed, it doesn't make sense to the normie mind of how it works. It's very much you're just trusting the process a lot. And, if something goes wrong, invariably it goes wrong and it really goes wrong. So I understand that that's obviously a fear. And by these stories, which we're going to come to now, it's just increasing that anxiety more and more. So the story that's made me want to cover this morning is a story from South Korea where a jet has caught fire at an airport in a place called Busan, South Korea, on Tuesday night, sparking mass evacuation. Had 176 people on board. Now, fortunately, everyone has managed to get off okay, but this follows on from a story a couple of weeks ago in South Korea as well, where a plane overshot the runway. Many of you will have seen and read about the stories involving turbulence last year, where planes were diverted. Someone actually died, if you remember rightly, of a heart attack. There were people with injuries to various different body parts of their head and so on because this turbulence came out of nowhere. People didn't have their seatbelts off. People hit the roof of the plane. That was over the Bay of Bengal, I believe, which is famously an area for high turbulence. Another few planes in the weeks after were diverted. We've seen over 300 people die from plane crashes last year, which is the most fatal year since 2018. And if you remember that 2018 year, that was the year when the 737 MAX Boeing plane came out and they had all the problems with it and they both crashed. Boeing have admitted last week they're losing $1 billion a month. You obviously had the incident last year with Boeing plane, the Alaska Airlines plane as well, when the door blew off mid-flight. And then the story this week involving that 2 737 crashes that I mentioned. Families of the victims are calling for Boeing to be criminally prosecuted for the deadliest corporate crime in US history and pay up to $25 billion in damages because, as I mentioned, safety concerns were raised, they were ignored, and 2 whole planes full of people didn't make it home that night. So what's your take on this? Do you think this is just coincidence or do you think this is part of...
I don't believe in coincidences, for one. But no, I think at the end of the day, accidents happen, things happen for sure. That is just, unfortunately, the nature of the beast when you're dealing with things like flying. I'll be honest, I don't understand how it works. I'm the same with those huge cruise ships and container ships. I know it's water displacement. I still don't get it.
I know I couldn't get a Lego boat to float in the bath.
It's mad. And so if anything does go wrong, then, it's normally fatal. And obviously, the aviation industry has been massively under attack. It was massively under attack through the whole COVID era where people couldn't fly and stuff like that. So the idea of a company cutting corners to save costs isn't beyond the realms to me.
Not at all.
At all. So I get that. But I think the promotion of it to create that fear and anxiety among people, I can see them taking advantage of it for sure. I think
100%.
I mean, we say this all the time. They always tell us. Now, they don't want us flying. That is you know, unless you're a multi-billionaire like Bill Gates, in which case you can fly around your private jet, that's not a problem. But peasants like us, we're not meant to fly. By 2030, you look at this CAN bill that they're trying to push through in the UK. They're openly saying there will be no flying by 2050. So it's obviously what they want. And what you can do is you can create a behavioural change.
Yep, you can.
And we saw that through COVID massively. I know I keep harking back to COVID, but I think it's relevant because it was when it all came out into the open. And that is, people didn't holiday abroad. They couldn't because they couldn't travel or whatever. Or like us, they didn't want to wear masks on planes and deal with all the hassle, so just forget it. So then they holidayed in the UK, or they didn't go to the pub anymore. Even when pubs reopened, they didn't bother. So I'm used to it. I just stay at home now. So you created this behavioural change. And I think that is something that will affect, and it is affecting the aviation industry. Less people are flying.
Yeah, 100% is. And also to touch on the plan for electric planes as well. Obviously, it's very much in the infancy, so there's not too much to talk about. But the fact that people that talk about electric cars expose the fact there isn't enough power to have everyone that has a petrol car now replace that with an electric car. There's simply not the infrastructure within the grid. There's just simply not the resources to make that happen. Think about that with aviation travel. I mean, I looked before we came on air this morning. 300 flights are leaving London, Paris and Amsterdam to go to America just today. Yeah. So think about that. That's just one route essentially. So think about that times, you know, internationally, how many flights, how many planes you'd have to replace for all the travel that happens now to be able to happen. So it's clearly not going to happen.
Well, they don't want it to happen.
No,
yeah.
And you're going to end up with a lot more isolated people because that whole saying travel broadens the mind, it does. You see other cultures, you speak to other people, you realise that actually we're not quite as different as it's made out. But if you don't have that reference point and you have your 15-minute city and you have the internet that is very much restricted as well, you're not seeing and hearing other opinions, which is part of the plan.
And also, to add on to that, like, again, COVID is obsessed. But people were stuck in their homes or they were stuck in their local communities. They didn't travel. And so you were told, oh, in the cities, it's carnage. Yeah. The hospitals in the city are carnage. Now, you had no way of verifying that, essentially, until people went into hospitals and filmed and end up going to prison for it because they showed us that actually these places weren't war zones. So that's it. You don't travel. You stay in your 15-minute city and all you hear about is what's going on around the world from the mainstream media. The propaganda arm of the state is telling you X, Y, and Z. These people are your enemies. These people are who you need to fear. These are the good guys. You know, the Nazis in Ukraine, they're good Nazis. Mm-hmm. And so that's your only point of reference. And I think that's definitely part of it. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Okay, so moving on. The ONS, so the Office for National Statistics here in the UK, released a report yesterday saying that net migration could push the UK population to 72.5 million. Now, that's if it's not already, given how many undocumented people are here. The story says the number is almost entirely based on net migration, the difference between those entering and leaving the country. Well, those people entering the country aren't obviously British. They're coming from various parts of the world. It's estimated that 4.9 million people will come over a 10-year period. Now, Britain is an island. It's a tiny island in terms of size of nations. When you look at other nations globally, it's a tiny island. We are in the process, and not just through the Labour government, but through successive governments, because let's have it right, we're a one-party state. I would argue we've probably always been, but it's been pretty obvious since New Labour came along in the mid-90s that we are absolutely a one-party state. We have committed suicide in our food production, the war on farmers. We've committed suicide with net zero on our energy infrastructure, and now we're going to bring in another 5 million people coming into this country. Now, what I find cute is that people still think that the Great Replacement is a conspiracy theory. I think it's cute that people still believe that. I find it staggering that people would consider that opinion of a Great Replacement to be a racist, bigoted conspiracy theory, when all the evidence of everyone's eyes is that is exactly what is happening. There's many cities in the United Kingdom now where, you know, ethnic Brits, native Britons are the absolute minority. That's evolved to such a point that these essentially migrant communities, they have control over who gets elected and who doesn't. Yep. And you see that in places like Leicester and Birmingham and Manchester and London.
Bradford.
And
Sheffield,
Bradford. More and more cities. And that's clearly going to go up more and more. And so, you can see that there's a war on Britain in terms of a war on being British. The idea, and this has gone on for years. The idea of that there is no British culture. Chicken tikka masala is your dish of the state. There's nothing British about this place. And what that does, it creates an apathy among the population of, well, whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter because we don't really have a culture anyway. And of course, we absolutely do have a culture. Now, when you speak up against this and say, look, this, even if you take away the whole damn foreigners and all that stuff, get rid of all that stuff and just take it on a basic level of, we don't have the infrastructure in this country. We don't have the room in this country to be able to take 4.9 million people in.
We don't.
We simply don't. The country is crumbling. We're at a point where they're having to basically cheat the system to break the law to put our council tax bills up even higher because councils are bankrupt. Mm-hmm. The BBC, they're now saying that, at the end of the day, if you watch streaming sites, you don't even watch the BBC and therefore don't pay your TV license, you're still going to have to pay it now anyway because all these organisations are running out of funding. You're going to bring more and more people in to a country that's failing. And now whenever you speak about it, you get called names, obviously, but that's fine. But when you're an Ike, you're used to it. It's water off a duck's back. All I keep hearing all the time is diversity is our strength. Now, you saw it in the court case with the Southport killer when he was being sentenced. They went to Sky News, interviewed someone outside. They said diversity is our strength, right? Who is our in this? Who is our? Exactly. Now, you can say diversity is our strength as many times as you like, and that's fine. But what does it actually mean? It's an empty slogan. It doesn't mean anything. And it's one of those things. It's like I say all the time about the United States. We're the land of the free. The reason they keep saying they're the land of the free is because it's not immediately obvious. Yep. You have to keep telling people. Now, you have to keep telling people diversity is our strength because that isn't obvious to people's eyes. They're seeing the country falling apart. Now, is diversity our strength related to Southport? Is that a strength? Is it no-go areas in this country that we didn't have before? Is that a strength?
Grooming gangs?
Is grooming gangs a strength? Now, you've seen that grooming gang in Scotland of all white people being convicted and everyone going, see, I don't see outrage about this. Well, there was lots of outrage about it. The difference was they were caught, tried, convicted, jailed. There was no, we better not say anything for 10 years in case we get called racist. That's what people are annoyed about. People are annoyed about the fact that you've got native Britons, people that have been born here, paid their taxes here, fought in the military here in foreign wars, that are sleeping in the doorways of migrant hotels, where people that have come over on a dinghy are there with a mobile phone and a full belly. Now, that injustice is what upsets people. Now, at the end of the day, doesn't matter what culture you are, you will find really nice people. You'll find, he's all right. And then you'll find absolute scumbags. That's every culture. But if you're importing 4.9 million people into an already, let's have it right, dying country that have different ways of seeing the world, different cultures, different ideas of what is normal and what is acceptable and what isn't, huge language barriers, a lack of work, so therefore crime goes up. And in fact, I'm not even going to judge people for that. Would I rob a supermarket of food to feed my kids? Yeah, I would. Yeah, absolutely I would. I'd look at Tesco making multi-billion profits and go, I don't care, I'll have some bread and milk, thanks, to feed my kids. So if you're coming into a country, because this is the thing, it's not just the native people here that are suffering. The migrants are suffering too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's three aspects to it. I think there's fairness, which you mentioned there, with people sleeping in doorways, have paid into the system their entire lives, while people coming over illegally, many of the time, are getting, food, shelter, water, and so on. I think there's basic mathematics, which is that, as you point out, Gaz, you've already got a crumbling infrastructure system, crumbling public services, all of those things that can't cope. You add more numbers on that, doesn't matter what culture they are. Even if every Briton had another kid, it's going to affect that in the same way. And there's culture. Yeah. You can't have lots of different cultures chucked into a room that might have completely different ideologies and attitudes towards every aspect of something and expect that to be harmonious. In the same way, you couldn't take 5 million Brits and chuck them into Saudi Arabia and expect it to be seamless. It wouldn't be. No. It would be total carnage. But as you mentioned there's this asserted effort, and there has been for years. I can look back a decade plus for this, where you should feel embarrassed to be British.
Yeah.
You should feel embarrassed to be from the West. Now, we've all got one thing in common that no one can argue with. Not a single person alive on this planet today chose to be born where they were born. You just got lucky, or you didn't get lucky. It's what you make of it. So the idea that you should inherently feel embarrassed because you were fortunate enough, and I do agree, we and you, we've been very fortunate to be born in this country, considering where you could have been born. The idea that you should feel embarrassed for that when it wasn't anything to do with you is horrendous. You know, you can choose whether you're born in Britain, whether you're born in the Middle East, whether you're born in Australia, whatever. You choose your character. That's what that comes down to you, and that's what you should be judged on, not where you were born, not the country that your passport says on it. And the idea that you should feel embarrassed to be British just because you happen to be born here is atrocious. And that's what you mentioned America. Obviously America go way over the top. You have a flag every other house, but at least they have a sense of national pride. It's misguided, but at least they have a sense of national pride. In Britain, imagine telling someone in the southern states of America you should feel embarrassed to be American. You get chinned.
Yeah, but it's more so England. I find it's more so England.
Yeah.
It's that famous saying, isn't it? I'm proud to be Scottish, said the Scotsman. I'm proud to be Welsh, said the Welshman. I'm proud to be English, said the racist.
Yeah.
And England, I think, gets more of a hit than the rest of Britain, really, in terms of actually being allowed to have some pride in who we are. Now, of course, our nation's done some horrendous things over the years. Absolutely, they have. I didn't do it. I didn't invade Iraq. I didn't go and take over large swathes of Africa. I'm not Cecil Rhodes. So why should I feel guilty about that? Now, what annoys me about it is you can't have a conversation. And like I go hark back to, diversity is our strength. Okay, well, there's schools in the city we're sat in now where they have to stagger school drop-off and pickups by nationality because the parents will fight each other in the car park. Is that part of the strength we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen? Can we have a conversation about it? Because no one voted. In fact, everyone voted for parties that said they would bring down migration. Now, the Tories said, we'll stop the boats. That was their nonsense. They went on for years. Never did it. Did the absolute opposite. Labour come in. Yeah, we're going to bring down... Well, you're not
smash
bringing
the
it down.
gangs. Yeah.
Smash the gangs. Have you got any more empty platitudes, mate? And here we go with the ONS saying that this is what's going to happen in terms of our population. And bearing in mind, a lot of where these people are coming from, they have much bigger families. You look at these families, say, that come over from Pakistan or from Albania or wherever, it doesn't really matter. They're having more children on average, way more children on average than native British people are. We might have one, we might have two. These people will come with 4, 5, 6, 7 kids sometimes. So then that spreads out even more and even more. And in the end, you can call the Great Replacement a conspiracy theory as much as you want, but it really isn't.
No, it's not. And I think what's important to talk about is that when you know the agenda, this is what we'll try and do every morning, is put this into a bigger context. When you know that the agenda is an end of nation states, diluting national identity, a sense of national pride, and also just chucking a mashup of cultures in amongst each other. It's not just England. You've seen it in Sweden. We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in various different countries in Europe, probably with the exception of Poland.
Well, you've only seen it in Western nations because it's only Western nations that are expected to take in mass migration.
Absolutely. And, you've seen the effects that it has. It changes culture completely. And that sense of national identity absolutely gets completely diminished. And I think what's important to mention for the people that will say you're racist for talking about this, a sense of national identity is a right and a culture that should happen in every nation. I'm not talking about England and we're England and we think this should happen in every nation across the world. Every nation should feel the same. They should look after their own people first. They should focus on issues that affect them first. That's where the money should go first. And that if every nation did that and it looked after its own, then it would be a very different scenario. But like you just said there, it's only Western nations that it seems to be expected that you're just going to do whatever we say because of things that may have been done in the past. And yeah, it's got a history that's not very nice. But me and you weren't part of that. No one alive today was part of that.
Exactly. The thing as well is just to finish this point, people need to realize that actually everything is inverted. So when these people say diversity is our strength, it's about diversity. It's not about diversity. It's the opposite of that. Diversity is having different nations with different cultures. You travel to Morocco. Oh, wow, what an amazing culture that is. You go somewhere else. I'm in Norway. It's a completely different place. There's a million different planets all on one planet. It's great. That's diversity. Mashing everything up together so it just becomes one big blob of nothing where every culture is diluted to such a point where there basically isn't one. It's the opposite of diversity.
I completely agree. Completely agree. Right, we're going to move on to a positive story because, as Gaz has pointed out a few times, we've got to celebrate the wins when we have them, and we've got to, highlight these positive stories when we can. Usually they're not as far as we'd like them to be in terms of going the full thing, but they're better than doing nothing. So Donald Trump today has banned taxpayer-funded sex changes for children, as he has added this to his flurry of executive orders. So this is a story that has been spoken about a lot. The idea of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and transitional therapies being done to children, particularly under the age of 18 and under the age of 16, which was out of control under the Democrats, which has been happening here in the UK. Massive controversy around a particular clinic in London called the Tavistock Clinic, which has now been under investigation for what it was doing. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing, the fact that's been banned. I'd look at one key word here though, taxpayer funded. So he's not banned it, he's banned it from being funded by the taxpayer in the States. You can still go and do that privately. So this is better than it was, but for me, it needs to go one step further and ban it completely for anyone under the age of 18. We all know, looking back, when you're 18, 17, 16, you don't know what the future holds for you. You're not experienced enough and knowledgeable enough and worldly enough to make decisions that are going to affect you for the rest of your life. You're simply not. You're not allowed to get married at 16 without your parents' permission. Well, you can just undo a marriage and walk away. You can't turn back, chopping bits off or adding bits or taking these hormones that are going to disrupt your development, particularly in puberty. So this needs to be one step further and go to banning it completely for anyone under the age of 18, or definitely under the age of 18. And just to touch on that as well, the puberty blocker ban that's been put forward here in the UK on the NHS, again, a similar sort of situation. You can go privately, but on the NHS, under 18, it's been banned. A politician in Wales has said that is unlawful and called for it to be changed. So there is lunatics out there that think, and this isn't even Labour, this is a former Plaid Cymru leader, the party of Wales. So there is politicians and people in positions of power out there that, it sounds messed up to say, seem to want to genetically mutate children. And this is a story that most people watching this will have heard previously, but these people still exist and they're still in positions of influence and power. So this is a positive story that it's been banned, but I think we need to make sure, as we've said with other stories that are positive, we keep on this and don't just relax and don't then let it kind of go through the back door where it comes back in a slightly different way. We say, okay, great, this is step one, it's better than it was yesterday, but we need to keep pushing to ban this completely to protect children, obviously, who are going through situations where they need support. They don't need things chopping off. They don't need drugs. They need support and understanding and discussion for whatever it is that they're going through. And it needs to be unpicked why they may feel that way. The answer being given to them in a form of a drug or an operation. The statistics show suicide rates increase after surgery and after blockers, not decrease. They'll try and tell you otherwise, but they don't. They increase. So the idea this is not for the benefit. Sorry, the idea that this is good for children is absolutely horrific. So a positive win, I'd say, on here.
Yeah, I mean, it brings it into the conversation, which is a win, because for me the whole thing is quite obvious that it's an agenda based on the fact, one, it's everywhere, but also the fact of how marginalised and silenced and attacked detransitioners are.
Yeah, massively.
Because they don't want to hear from them. Now, obviously, there's an iconic documentary called No Turning Back. We speak to detransitioners, which is huge, and I remember being in London at the premiere with a tear on the go, because like the courage of these people is incredible, but they've been massively attacked.
It's heartbreaking and
marginalised. Now, the puberty blocker thing is an interesting one, because I heard for many years, no, puberty blockers are there as a pause button, right? So it's a good thing, because I come from a good place too, and I don't believe that kids should have body parts just cut off, at a whim. So what the puberty blocker does is it buys time, where they come to terms with, their own feelings about who they are and who they want to be and identity and whatever. They don't tell you about the fact that puberty blockers make them infertile. That wasn't coming into the conversation. So it's all well and good saying it pauses. Well, it doesn't pause. It puts a full stop on it. And that person might further down the line go, actually, I went through a phase. We've all been through phases. Anyone see me at 16 with eyeliner and long blonde hair and nail varnish and all sorts? Our sister was called the Tank because she was a footballer. But if you ever knew her, she was a feminine woman. But when she was a teenager, she was known as the Tank. People go through mainly for 2-foot tackling people at football, but people go through phases.
Yeah.
And so they come out of that phase and they go, do you know what? Oh, wow, that was a phase in my teens. Right. What I really want actually is to settle down, have a family. Well, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
You know that 2 years of puberty blockers that the state had you on, you know. And another thing with this, which I found quite interesting, is they're purposely confusing children. That's been going on for a very long time. And it's a social contagion thing as well, where it suddenly becomes kind of popular to kind of, you know, be a bit different and whatever, which is fine if it's allowed to then be grown out of. But it's not grown out of if you're pumping drugs full of kids, or kids full of drugs even. And so I got a list here, which I found quite interesting in terms of the social contagion, obviously, because what are the percentages of transgender and non-binary kids is a small minority. It's growing, obviously, through social contagion, but it's still a tiny minority. And then I looked and I saw Sting, Sade, Charlize Theron has got 2. Any mathematicians out there want to tell me what the odds are on that? Jamie Lee Curtis, Sigourney Weaver, Cher, Jennifer Lopez, Tori Spelling, Cynthia Nixon, Warren Beatty, Marlon Wayans. What are the percentage chances mathematically of all these celebrities having transgender or non-binary kids? They're worn like a handbag to some of these people as well.
Yeah, they are, because it's cool and it's in the eyes of these people, and it's something that keeps them relevant. It keeps them in the conversation. It keeps them in the press. You know, like you said, this kind of pseudo love of, look at me, look how brilliant I am. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. When it's like, well, hang on a minute. You see stories all the time that 2 non-binary people who have managed to adopt a child, their child's just decided to be non. But did they? Or did they come to that conclusion on their own, or was that influenced? Just to touch on the puberty blocker thing you mentioned there, Gaz, I urge people to look up a drug called Lupron. Now, Lupron is a puberty blocker. It's the same drug manufacturer. It's one of the ingredients in it. It's also the same drug used to chemically castrate sex offenders. So when Gaz points out they make you infertile, well, literally they do. And there's a really good documentary on Daily Wire called What is a Woman, where Matt Walsh actually sits down and asks a woman who is working for that industry about Lupron, and she gets up and walks out of the interview because they can't justify and answer the question. And I think, you know, puberty blockers being a pause button, you're basically going through the most important physical, emotional, spiritual, and genetic change your body goes through when you go through puberty. The idea that you can just tell your body to stop doing everything that it is naturally been evolved over, you know, centuries to do with this drug that's been around 5 minutes, and then unpause it and everything carries on as normal and you just pick up where you left off. The idea that that's possible is actually madness when you say it out loud. It's actually insanity to even believe for a second that's possible, and it's clearly not. Hence why you're seeing so many kids with fertility issues when they get to that age. And I don't know about you guys, at 16 I wasn't thinking about having a family. It wasn't in my mind. Whereas you get to 21, you get to 22, 25, you do. So the decisions you make at 16, you can't make a decision based on, I definitely don't want a family, because you don't know at 16.
No.
That decision comes later in life. So therefore, the idea that this can carry on is disgusting. Kids need to be protected. That's the job of us as adults. We need to protect kids until they're old enough to be, you know, worldly enough to make their own decisions and understand the consequences of those decisions. So overall, I'd say this is a story for us to be positive about, but don't relax, because I'm sure they'll try and bring it back through a different way.
Of course they will, because it's a multi-billion-pound industry.
It is.
Puberty blockers. So, you know, I'm sure that they'll be fighting back. Okay, final story then. So the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, we spoke about them a bunch of times, so I won't go too massively into this. They're basically supposed to be an anti-hate organisation. They essentially attack anyone that questions the narrative, basically. They were formed by a guy called Morgan McSweeney, who is now the Chief of Staff of the Labour Party for Keir Starmer. Their CEO is a former Labour Party spin doctor and investment banker. So they're very much Labour. They're the ones hugely pushing the online harms bill to basically silence people online. They're the ones that coined the term the disinformation dozen for the doctors and scientists that were speaking out correctly about what was going to happen with the COVID vaccine. In terms of injuries and deaths, they were also massively important in destroying Jeremy Corbyn on the whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, that anti-Semitism crisis was manufactured to anyone that was paying attention, which then paved the way for Keir Starmer to become leader and then the Prime Minister. Like I say, Morgan McSweeney was rewarded fantastically for doing that. So that's the background on that information, that organisation anyway. So what's come out in the last couple of days? Now, this is a story from GB News. So GB News has, like all these news organisations, it has a bias. It doesn't just tell us what's happening, it tells us what's happening, but don't say that bit because it doesn't fit the narrative, and I'll come to that. So this is the headline. Lefties hell-bent on shutting down Elon Musk's X handed hundreds of thousands in taxpayer cash. Now, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't call the Labour Party a lefty party.
No.
Far from it. Again, like I say, we live in a one-party state where it's just, two cheeks on the same backside. Now, how this works is there's an organisation called the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. Now, they were given £1.4 million of taxpayer money by the government. I don't remember you or me being aware of that or consulted, but they were given 1.4 million. Now, of that 1.4 million, over 300,000 they then handed to the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, so that they could do things like kill Musk's Twitter, which was their exact terminology. We want to kill Musk's Twitter. Now, whatever the state wants, the CCDH will align with. So they are massively pro-vaccine, and they attacked anyone that wasn't. They were massively pro-lockdown. They're massively pro-immigration, and they will call anyone far-right for daring to point out the obvious. They're massively pro-climate change, by the way, as well, and they'll attack anyone that questions that load of absolute nonsense. The bit I found amusing is the CCDH are rabidly pro-Israel, right? They're rabidly pro-Israel, which is why they need to get rid of Corbyn and bring in Starmer, who is obviously massively pro-Israel. And so GB News left out that part when they're talking about the CCDH, because you might remember last week on Trending, we were talking about leaked emails that showed that the Centre for Countering Digital Hate were in contact with the Israeli government and were actually having meetings in London at the Israeli embassy. And then after those meetings, they then went on and attacked groups that were media outlets that were sympathetic to Jeremy Corbyn and were calling out the anti-Semitism shambles for what it was, a complete sham. GB News didn't mention that because GB News is massively pro-Israel.
Yep.
And this is what does my head in about the news. Just tell me what happened. You don't need to put your bias on it. Just tell me what happened. But they don't. They tell you what happened, but leave that bit out. Don't mention that bit. Don't mention that bit because it doesn't align with their narrative.
No, well, Israel is the end-level boss, isn't it, for all these people? That's the one thing that the right, left, centre, sky blue, pink, everyone seems to have in common, which is that they won't touch Israel. The other thing, just to mention, when you mentioned that it got rid of Corbyn, what it also did is it got rid of anyone in the Labour Party, Chris Williamson being another one, and others, who were sort of the old Labour mindset where you mentioned lefties probably were. Yeah, were more socialist in terms of their outlook and probably were more sympathetic and connected to the working class of Britain in the Midlands, the Northwest and the Northeast and so on. So he wanted rid of all of them. And obviously with having such a big mandate, now anyone dare step out of line, like a couple have, they just get rid of them because they don't need them, essentially.
Lose the whip, gone, bye, see you later.
Essentially, they don't need them because their majority is so big, with less votes than Corbyn got, ironically.
I mean, people don't like socialism. A lot of people watching this will be like, well, it's good to get rid of the socialists. Now, I'm not into socialism at all. In fact, I'm not into anyism, if I'm honest. But what I will say is that I think it's healthy to have those contrasts in politics. Because then you have a conversation. Because actually, black, white, the truth is normally the shade of grey. And so if you have one side pulling and another side pulling, and you can hopefully, after a conversation and a bit of mediation, get to some kind of semblance of balance, in theory, where you can make things work for most people. If you take away one side, and that goes for if you take away the right as well, like they did, obviously, when Biden came in, those conservative voices for at least a couple of years in the first year of the whole COVID nonsense were marginalised massively, particularly by the media and groups like the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. You only have one way of seeing the world and one way of doing things, and if you don't do it that way, then to hell with you.
Yeah.
So I think purging the party of different views is unhealthy. I actually think there's a place for socialism. I'm not a socialist, but I think you need those voices in the conversation so you can find some balance, which is not what they want, because they want what they want at a certain point, and then a bit further down the line, we want something different now. So the left goes, bring the right in. and then the right goes, we'll bring the left in, and the whole time they're just marching towards their end goal, which isn't nice.
No, it's not. Well, I think also it's looking and thinking you have the answer as one simple, all-encompassing answer of that idea. That's brilliant. Love every factor of it. That's what we do. That doesn't really exist, especially in politics. It's, okay, socialism, let's look after people who need help. Right, we'll take a little bit of that. Economic stability of the Conservatives. Okay, we'll take a little bit of that. And you take bits and pieces of each and make up something where everyone feels like their voices are heard, for one, and everyone feels like they have an influence. And that's where, in any form of negotiation, you should reach a point where everyone's kind of content. You probably don't reach a situation where one side is completely happy, the other side are devastated, because that doesn't work, especially if you want a harmonious, whether that be a country, whether that be a workforce, whether that be, anything. You're not going to have a situation that's harmonious if one side's happy and the other side feel like they're being fleeced. But if all the sides are going, I've given up a bit of ground, but I've got that, which I really like, and okay, I'm content with where we are. That's the recipe for a healthy, anything you can think of: marriage, relationships, state, workforce, team, all of it. Yeah. Give and take. But obviously we don't have that now. We have a situation where 9 million people that voted Labour are probably a lot less than 9 million now, are jumping from the rooftops thinking everything's brilliant. And you got the rest going, what the hell is going on? And, that's the same in country after country because of the way that the system is. But you mentioned before this election that Centre for Counter Digital Hate, we're going to have a big influence in this regime, and we're seeing it quite clearly.
Yeah, they will do. Absolutely, they will do. But that's why they need calling out at every opportunity.
100%. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Today's show was brought to you in association with Ape Nutrition, as always, bringing British organic food supplements onto the market. Head over to apenutrition.co.uk and use the code ICONICMedia for 10% off. Please comment on this video. Any stories you want us to cover, anything we've missed, stories in your local area, we want to hear it from you. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you later.